Nikon Speedlight Handbook, Flash Techniques for Digital Photographers by Stephanie Zettl, an enhanced audiobook for digital photographers, narrated by Lisa Rice. People often think of flash as a harsh, unflattering light, but you can take good-looking photographs by using flash to improve existing light. Taking great flash photographs just requires an understanding of the characteristics of light and the techniques needed to enhance them with your flash. Your photography will improve when you start looking at the quality of light and not just the quantity. You can recognize hard or soft light by the type of shadows in the photo. Hard light comes from a single-point source of light, like the sun or a direct, undiffused flash. It's very directional and creates well-defined shadows. Hard light can create texture and mood and render very saturated colors, but it can also create unflattering shadows and high contrast that makes it hard to capture detail in both shadows and highlights. Soft light is the even diffused light you get from the sun when it's diffused by clouds or from a diffused or bounced flash. It comes from multiple directions and creates undefined shadows. The larger a light source is, and the closer it is to your subject, the softer the light will be. The only way to show dimension and depth in photos is through the interplay of light and shadow, so it's important to know where the direction of the light will cause shadows to fall. Although the exposure here is correct, the non-directional light is unflattering. Its diffused quality makes Jenny's eye sockets dark, and the scene lacks visual interest. In this photo, I kept Jenny in the shade, but moved her to a position where the sun was reflecting off a nearby wall. Notice the light in her eyes and the soft, warm light on her face. Light can vary greatly in its color, from warm to cool. We quantify the color of light by measuring its color temperature in degrees on the Kelvin scale. For example, midday light is about 5500 K. The warmer and more orange the light, the lower the color temperature. The color of light can greatly affect the mood of a photograph. The warm glow of tungsten bulbs, sunrise, and sunset often creates a peaceful, soft, and intimate feel. Tungsten lights register close to 2800 K, and light at sunrise and sunset is usually between 2000 and 3000 K. Daylight has a crisp, clean feel. It can also lack some of the feeling that warmer or cooler light has. A neutral color temperature is often referred to as daylight balanced, or 5500 K. The cooler and bluer the light, the higher the color temperature. Light in open shade is often rated at 7000 K. Light from fluorescent bulbs tends to have a green cast. It can create a cold, inhospitable, or industrial feel. Before we start adding light to a scene with Nikon Speedlights, it's a good idea to have a solid understanding of how exposure works. The three components of exposure are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. The aperture is the opening in the lens through which light travels to the image sensor. Apertures use a diaphragm to change the size of the opening, letting in more or less light. Aperture sizes are described by f-stop numbers, with lower numbers for wider apertures. The f-stop is determined by dividing the focal length of the lens by the diameter of the aperture. F-stops follow a set sequence of numbers, so that by moving up or down the progression of f-stops, you're halving or doubling the image brightness. The aperture also controls depth of field, which is the distance between the nearest and farthest objects in a photograph that are in focus. A larger f-stop, like the f2.8 setting used here, will have a shallow depth of field. It lets you isolate your subject by making everything else fall out of focus. In this image taken at f5.6, the greater depth of field brings more of the scene into focus. Photographers often choose their aperture based on the depth of field they want in an image, and then adjust their shutter speed and ISO setting to create the correct exposure. At f22, almost everything is in focus. The shutter speed describes how long the camera shutter remains open, allowing light to reach the sensor. As with apertures, The standardized scale for shutter speeds halves or doubles the amount of light let into the camera as you increase or decrease your shutter speed. Besides having an effect on exposure, the shutter speed controls how movement appears in a photograph. Slower shutter speeds, like the 1/3 second speed used for this image, will blur all movement. That includes even small hand movements by the photographer who's holding the camera. For this series of photos of Jenny, I placed my camera on a tripod and had her walk across the scene at the same pace in each photograph. For this image, I increased the shutter speed to 1/30th of a second. Here, the shutter speed is set at 1/125th of a second. A fast shutter speed will freeze the action. For images of fast-moving action, such as sports photos, most photographers will work at 1/125th of a second or faster. For this image, the shutter speed is at 1/500th of a second. The ISO setting of a digital camera describes how much amplification is used after the sensor converts light into an electrical signal. The lower the ISO, or amplification, the more light is needed to create a proper exposure. As with shutter speeds and apertures, moving up the scale of ISO settings doubles your exposure with each full step. Manual flash exposure is affected directly by aperture, distance, ISO, and power output. Your shutter speed controls the ambient light exposure in images with flash. It doesn't affect the exposure of subjects illuminated by the flash because the flash burst is much shorter than available shutter speeds. Using a faster shutter speed allows less ambient light to register, so the background looks darker in images with flash. Here, the shutter speed is at 1/250th of a second. In this image, the shutter speed is at 1/30th of a second. Slowing the shutter speed in a low light situation lets you show more depth and location in a photograph. Here, the shutter speed is at 1/4 of a second. For all three photos, the Speedlight output was set to 1/32nd power, and the aperture was set at f8. By just slowing down the shutter speed, I was able to let in more ambient light without changing the flash exposure. You can use higher shutter speeds in brightly lit scenes to create more dramatic photographs that make your subject stand out by darkening the surroundings while properly illuminating the subject. In this frame, the shutter speed is set at 1/60th of a second. Here, I cut the shutter speed to 1/125th of a second. You can see that the background is darker. Here, the shutter speed is 1/250th of a second. The flash exposure for the subject is the same in all three photos because the aperture of f16 and the manual flash power setting of 1/2 power didn't change. Adjusting your aperture or ISO setting changes both ambient and flash exposure when you're using manual flash. The larger the aperture, the more light the lens will let in. Here the aperture is at f2.8. If your flash is set to the minimum manual power output and is overexposed like in this image, you can stop down to a smaller aperture to get the correct exposure. In this image, the aperture is at f4. For this series of photos, I fitted a softbox with a flash set to manual at 1/32nd power and set my shutter speed to 1/160th of a second. The shutter speed, ISO setting, and flash power output remained constant for all of the images here. Only the aperture changed. For this image, I used f5.6. This image was taken at f8. If you vary your ISO instead of the aperture, you'll see the same kinds of changes in exposure. Boosting your ISO can be a good option if you're underexposed at full flash power and can't open your aperture any wider. This image was taken at f11. I used f16 for this image. Notice how moving from f2.8 to f16 made the photo go from overexposed to underexposed, proving that the aperture settings affects the manual flash exposure. The way things work changes a bit when you're working with TTL flash instead of manual flash. In Nikon's ITTL mode, the flash takes into consideration any changes to your ISO and aperture, then adjusts the flashed output accordingly. This means that in TTL mode, you can use your aperture, ISO, and shutter speed to control the ambient light. This image was shot with ITTL at f4. This was taken at f5.6. In TTL mode, I adjusted my aperture, and the flash output adjusted itself automatically. Here I used f8. As long as you stay within the power range of your flash, you can change your aperture, and the flash will automatically adjust to provide the correct exposure for your subject. This was at f11. All 4 of these images were shot at 1/160th of a second and ISO 400. Your camera has a built-in light meter that measures the light reflected by a scene or subject. Built-in meters try to provide the correct exposure for a middle gray tone. But because they measure the light after it's reflected, their readings can be misleading, especially with very dark or light subjects. You can use a handheld light meter instead of your camera's built-in meter. Handheld light meters measure the light falling on your subject, which is called the incident light. Because handheld meters measure light before it hits your subject, they're not influenced whether the subject is light or dark. Your camera's histogram can also help you determine whether a photograph is overexposed, underexposed, or properly exposed. The histogram shows the entire range of brightness information that your camera can capture, from the highlight information displayed on the right side of the graph to the shadow information displayed on the left. This is the image that the histogram is from. Because most of the tones are very light, the histogram data is clustered near the right edge of the graph, even though the image is properly exposed. Many people think a histogram should always have a certain shape, but that fails to take into consideration the dominant tones in different scenes. Each image has a unique histogram that reflects the overall distribution of tones in the capture. This is the image that the histogram is from. Because most of the tones in the image are dark, the histogram data is clustered near the left edge of the graph. You'll have high and low points throughout each histogram. What matters most are the end points. A histogram of a good exposure has no spikes at the ends. In general, you want the right endpoint to come close to the edge of the histogram without hitting it or spiking the way it does here. You can see how overexposed the image that generated the histogram is. Here's a histogram of an underexposed image. Notice the large gap on the right-hand side. This is the underexposed image. You can only use a histogram as a tool to refine exposure with light sources that remain consistent, like ambient light and manual flash. When you're using TTL exposure, light levels will change according to the camera's calculations of how much light to output. So the histogram can't predict refinements you need to make for the next exposure. Your camera's blinking highlights display will show you tones that are overexposed to pure white. Notice that the blinking part of this image is only on the white background. Since we don't care if there's detail there, the blinking highlights aren't a cause for concern. The inverse square law states that the intensity from a point light source, like a speedlight, is inversely proportional to the squared distance between the subject and the light source. It's expressed by the formula I equals 1 over d squared, where I represents the intensity of the light on the subject, and d represents the distance of the light source from the subject. In this image, Meredith was 6 feet from the background. A speedlight in a softbox was 6 feet away from her. This setup resulted in a background rendering as nearly white. For this image, I moved the light to about a foot from Meredith, so the 6-foot distance between Meredith and the background was much greater than the distance between Meredith and the light. Because the light fall-off was much greater between the light and the background is rendered gray. Moving your lights back can help provide more even exposure from front to back in group photos. If you want to isolate your subject, you can make the background go darker by moving your light closer. The background can be rendered in any tone from white to black by varying the distances between your light, your subject, and the background. As a general guideline, if the existing light isn't interesting, it's time to pull out your Speedlight. There should be no excuse for not improving the quality of the light. Let's look at some images that were improved by using a flash. This photo was taken with natural light only. Here I've used an SB900 Speedlight as fill to decrease the effect of the ambient light, especially the light that bounced from the sidewalk and created some unattractive lighting patterns. The lighting on her face is more flattering in this image. Here's the setup I used for the last image. Heavy cloud cover ruined the late afternoon light for this magazine fashion shoot. The light was flat and unattractive. By adding a bit of flash bounced into an umbrella, I was able to recreate the warm glow of the setting sun and provide some quality light on the model, Danielle. This is another pose with only natural light. Here I added a flash. Allison makes a pretty bride, but the available light was very even and flat. Adding a bit of directed off-camera flash created a much more fashionable image of our bride. The dull diffused light caused by heavy cloud cover doesn't create catch lights in Amanda and Tiffany's eyes in this image with only natural light. Here I added an SB900 bounced into an umbrella. Now there are catch lights in their eyes, and the image has more life in general. Sometimes there's beautiful dramatic light in a photograph, but it just doesn't seem to fall on your subject. If you properly expose the background and add flash to light your subject, you don't have to compromise as to which part of the scene will look good. Nikon calls its Speedlight system the Creative Lighting System, or CLS. It gives you precise control over the light produced by your Speedlight when you use it with a compatible Nikon camera. The SB910 is the current flagship of the Nikon Creative Lighting System. It's the most powerful and advanced Speedlight Nikon produces. Nikon's older SB900 is very similar to it, but has a slightly different control layout. Let's take a close look at the SB910. The flash head contains the flash tube and reflectors, and the zoom mechanism that shifts their position to change the angle of illumination. The SB910 automatically senses the focal length of a compatible lens on your camera and adjusts the zoom. Pressing this button lets you tilt the flash head down to a -7-degree angle or up to 90 degrees, with click stops at -7, 0, 45, 60, 75, and 90 degrees. You can also rotate the head horizontally 180 degrees to the left or right. This is the lid of the battery chamber. The SB910 holds 4 AA batteries. This is the sensor that receives signals from the master flash when the SB910 is working as a remote. This small plastic card pulls out with a wide flash adapter. It's used to provide a bit of bounce-back fill light when the flash head is pointed directly upward to bounce the flash off the ceiling. This pull-out diffuser spreads the light from the flash to fully illuminate the angle covered by a 14mm lens. The zoom on the flash is automatically set to 14mm when the adapter is in use. Nikon's flash filters have a special code on them that the flash reads to determine the filter color. A built-in LED projects a red beam onto your subject when you're working in low-light situations. This helps the camera's autofocus system lock focus on your subject. The ready light will light up red when the flash is ready to fire. The external power source terminal lets you attach the SB910 to the SD9 battery pack, which provides quicker recycle times. This sensor allows the flash to meter the light reflecting off the subject externally, instead of using through-the-lens metering. These contacts let the flash communicate with the camera when the AF assist illuminator is needed. When you turn the mounting foot lock lever, This mount pin drops down to lock the flash into your camera's hot shoe. These 4 pins connect to the contacts in the hot shoe of a Nikon camera. They transmit information between the camera and the flash. These 4 pins connect to the contacts in the hot shoe of a Nikon camera. They transmit information between the camera and the flash. The mounting foot attaches the flash to your camera's hot shoe. This scale shows the angle that the flash head is positioned at vertically. The flash head tilts down to -7 degrees or up to 90 degrees. This scale shows the angle that the flash head is rotated to horizontally. The sync terminal allows you to use a sync cord to fire your SB910. The LCD displays the current settings of your flash and gives you access to the flash menu and advanced settings. This ready light shows that the flash is ready to fire. Turning the mounting foot lock lever locks the flash into the hot shoe. You press the Mode button to select the flash mode. You press the Menu button to access the SB910's custom function options on the LCD. The function assigned to each of the 3 function buttons may change according to the flash mode and status. The active function for each button is indicated by an icon above it on the LCD. The ready light doubles as a button that you can press to fire a test flash or turn on a modeling illuminator, depending on which option is selected. The modeling illuminator makes the flash fire at a reduced output for about 1.5 seconds, so you can check the look of your lighting. This switch turns the flash on or off and lets you see it to work either as a master unit or a remote unit. To switch between master and remote, you press the button in the middle of the switch when turning it. You rotate the selector dial to change the item that's selected on the LCD. Lightly pressing this OK button confirms a selected setting. The main difference in design between the SB910 and the SB900 is that the button nearest to the selector dial is a zoom button instead of a menu button on the SB900. It lets you adjust the flash zoom position. You access the menu by holding the OK button down for 1 second. The smaller and slightly less powerful SB700 has fewer features than the SB910 and SB900, but offers more intuitive and easy-to-use features and controls. The flash head contains the flash tube and reflectors and the zoom mechanism that shifts their position to change the angle of illumination. The SB700 automatically senses the focal length of a compatible lens on your camera and adjusts the zoom. Pressing this button lets you tilt the flash head down to a -7 degree angle, or up to 90 degrees, with click stops at -7, 0, 45, 60, 75, and 90 degrees. You can also rotate the head horizontally 180 degrees to the left and right. This is a sensor that receives signals from the master when the SB700 is working as a remote. The SB700 holds 4 AA batteries. This small plastic card pulls out with a wide flash adapter. It's used to provide a bit of bounce-back fill light when the flash head is pointed directly upward to bounce the flash off the ceiling. This pull-out diffuser spreads the light from the flash to fully illuminate the angle covered by a 14mm lens. The zoom on the flash is automatically set to 14mm when the adapter is in use. Nikon's filters have a special code on them that the flash reads to determine the filter color. The detector senses when a Nikon diffusion dome is attached to the flash and adjusts the zoom head accordingly. The ready indicator will light up red when the flash is ready to fire. A built-in LED projects a red beam onto your subject when you're working in low light. It helps the camera's autofocus system lock focus on your subject. These contacts let the flash communicate with your camera when the AF assist is needed. When you turn the mounting foot lock lever, the mount pins drop down to lock the flash into the hot shoe. These 4 pins connect to the contacts in the hot shoe of a Nikon camera. They transmit information from the camera to the flash and vice versa. The mounting foot attaches the flash to the camera's hot shoe. This scale shows the angle that the flash head is positioned at vertically. The flash head tilts down to -7 degrees or up to 90 degrees. This scale shows the angle that the flash head is rotated to horizontally. The ready light shows that the flash is ready to fire. The LCD displays the current settings of your flash and gives you access to the flash menu and advanced settings. Turning this lever locks the flash into the hot shoe. You slide this selector to select the flash mode. You press the zoom button to adjust the zoom position. The ready light doubles as a button that you can press to fire a test flash. You press the menu button to display the custom menu settings on the LCD. You can rotate the selector dial to change the item selected on the LCD. You can slide this lever to select the flash illumination pattern. There are 3 different illumination patterns you can choose: standard, center-weighted, and even. This button selects the item to be configured. The power switch turns the flash on or off and lets you set it to work as either a master unit or a remote unit when you're using the wireless lighting system. To switch between master and remote, you have to press the button in the middle of the switch down when turning it. You press the OK button lightly to confirm a setting you've selected. The SB400 is a very basic flash that's good for photographers looking for more power and control than their camera's built-in flash can offer. The SB400 takes 2 AA batteries. The mounting foot attaches the flash to a camera's hot shoe. Turning this lever locks the flash into the hot shoe. The SB400 is so simple that the only control on it is the power switch. When this ready light is on, the flash is fully charged and ready to fire at full power. The light will blink if there's a problem with the flash, such as low battery power or overheating. The SB400 works only in ITTL mode, except when you're shooting with Nikon's D40 and setting it to manual on the camera. One of the features of the SB400 is a tilting flash head that allows you to bounce the flash. It tilts from a horizontal position to a 90-degree position that points straight up. The SU800 is a wireless speedlight commander that triggers remote flashes, reads the responding pre-flashes, and conveys that information to the camera so that it can calculate the proper exposure. It communicates with speedlights by sending infrared pulses and doesn't emit any visible light. A few Nikon cameras, including the D700 shown here, have built-in pop-up flashes. I wouldn't recommend relying solely on the pop-up flash for lighting, but it's extremely useful because it can be set to function as a commander that can control 2 different groups of remote speedlights. The R1C1 kit for close-up photography consists of an SU800 speedlight commander kit, 2 SB-R200 speedlights, and an SX1 attachment ring. The attachment ring clips onto the front of your lens with a special adapter, and up to 8 SB-R200 units clip onto the attachment ring. Moving the flash closer to your lens with the R1C1 kit lets you get more even and controlled lighting for close-up photography and macro photography. It essentially functions as a ring light and reduces shadows that are created when the light is farther away. This image was taken with a single on-camera flash. This image was taken with the R1C1 kit. The original ring light was created by a dentist in the 1950s. Today, many dentists use the R1C1 kit to take photos of the mouth that show all the teeth. You may want to take pictures of something other than teeth. I wanted to take photos of citrus fruit and emphasize all the different segments of the fruit. I used the R1C1 kit so that I had even illumination across my frame while working close to my subject. First, I laid the fruit out on a piece of glass. Next, I backlit the fruit. Then I powered the backlight down 1 stop to get the lighting I wanted in the final image. For comparison, this photo was taken with the SB900 on camera. Notice the light fall off at the bottom. That's a common occurrence when you use on-camera flash for macro photography. The SB910, SB900, and SB700 come with several accessories that give you more control over your lighting. This speedlight stand works as a compact, stable base for a remote flash, and also features a standard tripod socket so that you can attach it to a light stand or tripod. The SB900 comes with a filter holder and 4 different acetate filters for matching the flash's color temperature to the ambient lights. The filters have identification codes on them so that the flash can automatically recognize the filter type. The SB700 and SB910 come with hard plastic filters like the ones shown on the right. The SB700, SB900, and SB910 come with a diffusion dome that attaches over the flash head and filter. Most speedlights run on AA batteries, and you can use alkaline, lithium, or rechargeable nickel metal hydride. Each type has different advantages in terms of cost, battery life, and how long the battery takes to recycle between flashes. Rechargeable nickel metal hydride batteries are usually the best option. It's extremely important to use fresh, fully charged batteries when you're working with wireless flash. Nikon's SD9 battery pack helps shorten the recycle time of your flash and increase your flash capacity. It operates on 4 or 8 AA batteries and is compatible with the SB910 and SB900. It's especially valuable when you're using wireless speedlights because they can malfunction if your power is low. A flash's guide number represents the amount of light it will produce at a certain ISO and zoom head position. The higher the guide number, the more powerful the flash. This table for the SB900 tells you the guide numbers for the flash when you're shooting at ISO 100 on a DX format camera and using the standard illumination pattern. You can find a guide number table for your speedlight in its manual. Guide numbers can also tell you the correct aperture for flash exposure at a specific distance, manual power setting, and ISO setting. To determine the correct aperture, A, at a set ISO and zoom head position, divide the guide number by the distance, D, of the flash to the subject. GN over D equals A. If you know the aperture you want to work at, you can divide the guide number by the aperture to determine the distance your subject needs to be from the flash. GN over A equals D. Guide number tables usually give you guide numbers for shooting at ISO 100. To find the guide number for a different ISO setting, just multiply it by the appropriate factor shown here. The factors are easy to remember since they're the same as the one-stop intervals for apertures. In manual mode, you choose the flash power output and the aperture. Power levels on Nikon speedlights range from full power to 1/128th power. Once you have your aperture, ISO, and zoom position set, a Nikon flash LCD will give you the distance your subject needs to be from the flash for a proper exposure. The main benefit of manual flash is that you're guaranteed a repeatable flash output from frame to frame. Here I had my speedlight set up at a fixed distance from the group. I could repeat the same exposure over and over again as the group size changed because my flash settings and distance stayed the same. The GN on the LCD shows that this speedlight is set to distance priority mode. It's a semi-automatic mode that determines your flash power output when you set your aperture and the distance of your flash from your subject. Distance priority mode is useful for extreme close-up photography. It's also useful when you know that the subject will always be at a certain distance from your flash, but you might want some freedom to change your aperture. This was taken in distance priority mode at f5.6. Here I changed the aperture to f22 because I knew my flash would remain at a set distance from my subject. Using distance priority mode, let me adjust my aperture as needed. Non-TTL auto flash or auto aperture mode uses a built-in sensor to measure the flash illumination reflected from the subject. It combines the information from the sensor with information from the camera to determine the flash exposure. I used the non-TTL auto aperture mode for this image. Because the flash exposure is determined by a sensor on the flash and not through the lens metering, this mode can be a bit more accurate in certain circumstances and more consistent from frame to frame. Nikon's Intelligent, or ITTL, is the most automated and the most advanced of the flash modes. It works by evaluating the flash exposure and then setting the speedlight to the proper power level. Nikon ITTL has two modes, Standard and Balanced Fill Flash, or BL mode. This photo was taken in Standard ITTL mode, which exposes the main subject correctly no matter what the background brightness is. In ITTL BL mode, the flash automatically adjusts its output level so that the exposures for the subject and the background are well balanced. In the repeating flash mode, the speedlight fires multiple times during an exposure to create a stroboscopic multi-exposure effect. This mode is often used with fast-moving objects and works best in dimly lit locations where the ambient light doesn't affect the overall exposure or cause ghosting. To use the repeating flash mode properly, you need to know the flash frequency, or number of times the flash fires per second, the flash output level, and the number of times you want the flash to fire in a single exposure. If you're using the SB900, you can consult this table to get the right exposure for each frame and the number of repeating flashes you want at any given power level. To create an image in the repeating flash mode, put your camera on a tripod and set its exposure mode to manual. Then on the flash, set the output level, the number of times you want the flash to fire, and the frequency. Next, calculate the correct aperture and shutter speed to use. To calculate the aperture, look up the guide number indicated by the flash output level and zoom position. Then divide the guide number by the distance between your speedlight and the subject. To calculate the shutter speed, divide the number of flashes you want per frame by the frequency of flashes. That will tell you the fastest shutter speed you can use and still include as many flashes as you want in the shot. I've achieved the best results with subjects moving parallel to the camera because the subject exposure stays the same with each flash, and I don't get multiple images layering on top of each other in a way that looks overexposed and not very interesting. SU4 mode is a great feature on Nikon's more advanced speedlights. It's basically a built-in optical remote that allows your speedlight to be triggered by light from any other flash. For the flash in SU4 mode to fire, the remote eye on its side needs to be pointed toward the triggering flash. On advanced Nikon cameras, you can program a button to work as a flash value lock. Using a flash value lock lets you maintain the same flash exposure for your main subject throughout a series of photos in ITTL, or auto aperture flash mode. I took this image in ITTL mode. Here, I changed my composition and focal length without using the flash value lock, and ITTL made a different judgment about the amount of flash power it should output. Here, I applied the flash value lock before changing my composition and focal length, so the exposure remains the same as in the original image. To activate the flash value lock, you point the camera at your subject and press the button you've programmed on your camera. Flash exposure compensation is valuable when you're working in any of the automatic flash modes, where the flash or camera's meter determines how much output the speedlight should give. You can adjust flash exposure compensation on your camera or directly on the flash. The flash exposure compensation value for Nikon runs between -3 EV and +3 EV. This is 3 stops below and 3 stops above the metered flash output for a 6-stop range. This image was shot at 0 EV. One of the important things to remember about the Nikon system is that exposure compensation on the camera body controls the value exposure and the ambient light. With flash as your main source of light, if you increase the exposure compensation on your flash by 2 stops and reduce it by 2 stops on camera, the settings will basically cancel each other out. Here, flash exposure compensation was set at -1 EV. In this image, flash exposure compensation was set to -2 eV. And here, flash exposure compensation was set to -3 eV. While it might seem counterintuitive at first, it's important to keep two guidelines in mind. First, if your scene is composed of mostly light tones, like this one, increase your flash exposure compensation. You're using the flash to compensate for the fact that the camera will try to make white tones middle gray. Second, if your scene is composed of mostly dark tones, decrease your flash exposure compensation. There's no standard for how much you'll need to change the flash exposure compensation for a scene. Many factors will determine that, including the tone and reflectivity of your subject, how much your frame is filled by the subject's distance from the background, the available light, backlighting, and composition. This photo was taken with direct on-camera flash in TTL-BL mode. In that mode, the flash balances its output with the available light. You may still want to reduce your flash exposure compensation, but you'll generally have to do it less when using TTL-BL for fill flash. When I used the ITTL mode, it overexposed my subject. With standard ITTL, you'll generally need to lower your flash exposure compensation to somewhere between -1 eV and -3 eV when you want just a touch of fill. The exact value will depend on the available light and tonality of your subject. I dialed the ITTL down by 1 stop to get this exposure, which is closer to the TTL-BL setting. So why not shoot in TTL-BL all the time? I've found that when I bounce my flash in TTL-BL mode, the photograph can be a bit underexposed. Here, I got what I think is a very pleasing fill flash level by dialing the flash exposure compensation down -2 eV. For both of these images, I bounced the light off the wall and the ceiling to the left of the camera. I took the image on the left with the TTL-BL mode and the image on the right with the ITTL mode. You can see almost a half-stop difference between them. The SB910, SB900, and SB700 flashes have menu features that allow you to customize how your flash functions. Let's take a look at them, starting with the custom function sets on the SB900 and SB910, which are almost identical. These are the selectable icons for non-TTL automatic flash modes we've already discussed, including auto aperture flash with modeling illumination, auto aperture flash without modeling illumination, non-TTL auto flash with modeling illumination, and non-TTL auto flash without modeling illumination. By turning the repeating flash function on, you allow the flash to control multiple remote speedlights in the repeating flash mode. This function lets you adjust the output level in third stops when you're in the manual mode and working between full and half power. The default setting lets you adjust your output in full stops when you're between full and half power. This function is represented by different icons on the SB900 and SB910, as shown here. This setting on the SB910 lets you select between Nikon's advanced wireless lighting system and SU4 optical triggering. Activating this function puts the SB900 into SU4 mode in both master and remote settings. It disables the advanced wireless lighting system and pre-flashes. The flash operates as a simple optical slave or remote. This setting allows you to choose your illumination pattern and how much light falloff you have at the edge of the image frame. You can choose center-weighted, standard, or even illumination. You can set your test firing button to trigger a flash or turn on a modeling light. The modeling light is a continuous series of flashes for about 1.5 seconds. It lets you see the effect the flash will have on your subject. This determines the output level of the test flash when the speedlight is set to ITTL mode. You can choose between the default 1/128th power setting, 1/32nd power, or full power. The default setting for this function is for the flash to automatically detect whether it's attached to an FX or DX format camera. The flash will automatically change the light distribution angle based on the camera's image area. The custom function lets you disable the automatic function and manually set the speedlight to FX or DX. The Speedlight has an automatic zoom function that adjusts the flash head to match the focal length of your lens. By turning this function on, you're turning the power zoom off. The Autofocus Assist Illuminator uses red LEDs to project a lighting pattern onto your subject. It helps give the scene some contrast that the camera's autofocus can lock onto in low-light situations. You can set this function to on or off, or turn off flash firing so that only the Autofocus Assist works. This lets you adjust the time that the Speedlight stands idle before it goes into sleep mode. You can also disable the standby function. This allows you to manually adjust the ISO setting on the flash. With older film cameras, it needs to be adjusted manually. Current cameras communicate the ISO information directly to the flash. When the flash is set up as a remote, there are 3 ways it can indicate that it's ready to fire. You can have the 2 LEDs in front blink and the red ready light on the back turn on. You can have just the LEDs in front, or you can have just the rear ready light. This allows you to adjust the LCD panel brightness. The thermal cutout feature prevents your flash from firing when it's in danger of overheating. You can disable thermal cutout on the SB900. On the SB910, thermal cutout is always on and can't be disabled. You can activate a sound monitor that beeps to indicate the status of your flash when you're using it as a remote. This allows you to change the contrast of the LCD panel to make it easier to view in bright light situations. This lets you view the distance meeting on the Speedlight in either feet or meters. If the built-in wide flash adapter is broken off accidentally, the automatic power zoom function is disabled and the Speedlight stays at the widest zoom setting. If that situation arises, turning this function on will allow the flash to once again automatically set the zoom position. This function lets you see either all of the custom function settings in the menu or just the select ones that you change most often. The default setting is to see the full menu. This shows the firmware version. You can update the SB900 and SB910 firmware by connecting the Speedlight to a compatible camera. This resets all of your settings back to the factory defaults. Now let's look at the custom functions available on the SB700. There are fewer of them than on the SB900 and SB910. The color filter settings shown here let you manually set the color of the filter being used on the SB700. Activating this feature puts the flash in an SU4 type wireless flash mode. The SB700 can only be used as a remote flash unit in SU4 mode. The SB700 doesn't have an autofocus assist only mode, but you can turn autofocus assist on or off. These are the remaining custom functions on the SB700. They work the same way as on the SB900 and SB910. Flash sync modes determine at what point during the movement of the shutter curtains your camera fires the flash. The shutter of a modern DSLR is made up of 2 metal curtains. When you press the shutter release button, the first curtain opens to expose the sensor to light. The second curtain then follows the first curtain and closes to end the exposure. The time between the opening of the first curtain and the closing of the second curtain is the shutter speed. Here you can see how a flash synchronizes with a shutter release. The higher your shutter speeds, the narrower the space between the shutter curtains as they move across the image area. A camera's maximum flash sync speed is the fastest shutter speed at which the first curtain is completely open before the second curtain starts to close. This image shows what happens if you use a flash at a shutter speed higher than your maximum flash sync speed. A shutter curtain blocks some of the sensor when the flash is firing and gets exposed in the photo. The maximum flash sync speed for most Nikon cameras is 1/250th of a second. In first curtain sync mode, the flash will fire as soon as the first shutter curtain is completely open. The flash freezes moving subjects at the beginning of the exposure, making ambient light record as a blur in front of the subject when you're using slower shutter speeds. Second curtain sync fires the flash just before the second curtain closes, so ambient light creates blur behind moving subjects when you're using slower shutter speeds. That gives a much more accurate sense of movement. Using second curtain sync with a slow shutter speed of 1/5 of a second helped convey a lively party with lots of action in this photo. Because the flash happens at the end of the exposure with second curtain sync, you have to anticipate the action so that you don't miss the perfect moment or expression. Sparklers are always fun to play with. For this 5-second exposure, I place my camera on my tripod, set my camera to rear curtain sync, and ask the couple to play with the sparklers and end with a kiss. The long exposure recorded the ambient light from the sparklers, and the flash captured the kiss. With your camera in manual mode, you can select a shutter speed that's long enough to record the ambient light in the background. To achieve the same thing in a priority or automatic shooting mode, select Slow Sync Flash on your camera. The image on the right was taken with slow sync, and the image on the left without it. Red eye occurs when light bounces off your subject's retinas. You'll often see it in photos taken in dim light. In red eye reduction slow sync mode, your Speedlight will fire pre-flashes that cause your subject's pupils to contract. Select the mode on your camera. When you want to use a wide aperture for creative purposes, but you can't get a good exposure with shutter speeds at or below the flash sync speed, you can use high-speed sync. It's also useful for freezing fast action. It makes the flash pulse multiple times at a lower output during the exposure, as you can see in this illustration. Here's an image taken in manual mode with the flash set to full power. My aperture was at f5.6. and my shutter speed was at 1/250th of a second. Here I've switched to high-speed sync and bumped my shutter speed up to 1/320th of a second. As you can see, there's no black bar from the shutter appearing in the image, but the lower power output of high-speed sync mode makes the image underexposed. Here I open my aperture to f2.8 to correct the exposure. When you shoot in high-speed sync mode, the lower power output means your flash-to-subject distance will be reduced. It will also drain your batteries faster. A Speedlight zoom helps its flash coverage match the angle of view of your lens. Your flash will automatically detect the focal length of the lens and adjust the flash head accordingly. You can also set the zoom focal length manually for creative purposes. The flash shown here is set to 200 millimeters. These photos were shot with a 24mm lens at the same exposure settings. The one on the left was shot with a flash head at 35mm, and the one on the right was taken with a flash zoom to 200mm. That created a spotlight effect with a minimal spread of light. By choosing a narrow spread of light, you can basically create your own spotlight. These photos demonstrate the effect of zooming your flash head from 50mm on the left to 105mm in the center, and then to 200mm on the right. Nikon Speedlights let you choose from 3 illumination patterns: standard, center-weighted, and even. Standard illumination produces minimal fall-off at the edges and is good for most subjects. Center-weighted focuses the light more tightly in the center and creates more noticeable fall-off. It's good for portraits. Even illumination provides even less fall-off than standard illumination. It's good for group portraits. There are 2 main reasons why we want to modify the light from our Speedlight. 1, to diffuse the light by increasing the spread of light from the flash. Or 2, to control, direct, or restrict the spread of light from the flash. This is what an image taken with direct on-camera flash looks like. Using a modifier to diffuse the light can give your photos a much more pleasing and natural look, and using a modifier that restricts the spread of light gives you creative control over shaping the light. The built-in wide-angle diffusion panel that you see in front of the flash head here increases the spread of light produced by the flash. It's most often used with a wide-angle lens to make sure the entire image frame is evenly lit by the flash. You can see the effect of using the wide-angle diffusion panel here. It's not as effective as other diffusion modifiers, but it does make a difference. The SB910, SB900, and SB700 come with rectangular plastic dome diffusers that attach directly to the flash head. You can tilt the flash head to a 45-degree angle when using a diffusion dome to bounce the flash off the ceiling and walls while still directing some light forward. You can see the effect of using a Nikon dome diffuser here. While it softens shadows, the light is fairly flat and non-directional. You can buy other diffusers separately. One example is the Light Sphere by Gary Fong. Here's the effect of using Gary Fong's Light Sphere. Another option is the Globe Diffuser from Intervid Strobe's line of flash modifiers. This image was taken with the Globe Diffuser. When you use any of these modifiers with an on-camera flash and take a vertical photograph, there tends to be a visible side shadow behind the subject. In my opinion, the shadow is ugly. Bounce reflectors and cards give you a surface to bounce the flash off of, to spread the light around to make it look more natural. They're relatively inexpensive, easy to use, and practically indestructible. More advanced flash units have a pull-out bounce card like the one shown here. Here's the effect of using a built-in bounce card. You can also buy a bounce card like this one from Handheld separately. When shooting with a bounce card, point the flash upward at a 90-degree angle so that light bounces forward onto the subject. This is the effect of using a Handheld bounce card. Another option is using the Rogue Flash Bender as a bounce card. Here's the effect of the Rogue Flash Bender. With a LumaQuest Pro Max reflector like this one, you have to use a flash bracket to take vertical photos so that the flash stays in the same position, but the camera orientation moves. This image was taken with the LumaQuest modifier. You can also use inexpensive materials like white craft foam or thick index cards as bounce cards. Just attach them to your flash with a strong rubber band. In a pinch, you can also hold your hand up behind the Speedlight. Umbrellas are affordable and easy to use. A translucent shoot-through umbrella is made of white fabric and placed between the flash and your subject. It makes light softer by increasing the relative size of the light from your flash and causing it to come from many angles. Here's an image taken with a shoot-through umbrella. Reflective umbrellas are used to bounce light back onto your subject from a white, gold, or silver interior. White produces the softest light, silver gives it more specularity, and gold adds warmth. The angle of diffusion is not as great as with shoot-through umbrellas. This shows the effect of a reflective umbrella. Some umbrellas are convertible from reflective to shoot-through, with a removable black cover and a translucent white interior. Umbrellas spread light quite a bit and give you limited control. That makes them very good modifiers to use with large groups. Like umbrellas, softboxes increase the relative size of the light from your flash to create soft, beautiful lighting. But softboxes give you much more control over where the light will go. Here's an image taken with an SB900 flash in a softbox. As the name suggests, a softbox is a four-sided black nylon box with reflective material on the inside and diffusion material on the front. There's an opening in the back to attach a Speedlight or another light source. This is a Lastolite EasyBox softbox. Here's an image taken with a Lastolite EasyBox. Softboxes like the EasyBox fold up easily and don't require metal rods to keep their shape when they're open, unlike traditional studio softboxes. They're made with Speedlight use in mind. The Intervid Strobe's folding softbox is a similar option. Softboxes come in many sizes, from 8 by 8 inch models that attach directly to your flash, to larger softboxes that use a standard speed ring and flash mount. With a single Speedlight, I recommend using a 15 by 15 or 24 by 24 inch softbox with a standard speed ring. This photo shows the effect of an Intervid Strobe's folding softbox. A beauty dish reflector for use with a speedlight is a shallow curved pan with a hole for mounting the flash. A second smaller pan is mounted in the front of the speedlight, so its light bounces back into the larger main dish and then onto the subject. This is a 6-inch beauty dish from Interfit's Strobie's line. Here's an image taken with the Strobie's beauty dish. The nice thing about beauty dishes is that they're highly directional. They're essentially a step between umbrellas and softboxes. Beauty dish light is diffused, but still defined enough that you can direct and feather it as you would with a softbox. This is a 15-inch beauty dish from Interfit's Strobie's. The ideal distance to place your beauty dish from your subject is generally 2 times the diameter of the dish. This photo shows the effect of the 15-inch beauty dish. Because beauty dish light is more focused than softbox light, the edge of the light spread is fairly abrupt. Using a larger dish moves the edge out of the image frame here. Ring flashes, which are common in macro photography, have gained a great deal of popularity in fashion and portrait photography over the past few years. They soften existing shadows without casting their own set of directional shadows and give the model a shadowy halo. The last image was taken with an Orbis ring flash, which is an attachment that converts your speedlight into a ring flash. You just attach the Orbis to your speedlight and insert your lens through it. You can also use the Orbis off camera to make your speedlight flash larger and softer. Diffusion panels are large pieces of translucent material that are stretched over a frame, which is usually collapsible. Placing a panel between your subject and your speedlight diffuses the light and makes shadows less defined. This image shows the effect of using a diffusion panel. The difference in the quality of light you get from a softbox and a diffusion panel is that softboxes can create more even lighting across their front panel, especially when used with internal baffles. Diffusion panels can have a hot spot. The built-in zoom function of a speedlight is really for matching the spread of light to the angle of view of your lens. But you can create a spotlight effect by choosing a focal length on your speedlight that's longer than the focal length of the lens. A snoot is a tube that attaches to the front of the flash and restricts the spread of light. The longer the snoot, the more restricted the spread of light will be. This is a snoot made by Handheld. Here's an image taken with the Handheld snoot. Snoots can be made of all different types of material. Commercial snoots for speedlights tend to be made out of durable and flexible nylon material. This is a Rogue flash bender. You can also make your own snoot out of Roscoe cinefoil, craft foam, or any other malleable material that will keep its form. Just wrap the material around the flash and secure it with a rubber band. This image was taken with a Rogue flash bender. Because the material of a snoot is flexible, there tends to be a natural unevenness to the edge of the light. If you're looking for a more precise edge, use a grid. Like snoots, grids reduce the spread of light, but they do it in a much more controlled and precise manner. Grids have very distinct and uniform lighting patterns. Here you can see the effect of using the grid just shown. This Strobie's grid has smaller openings. The smaller the grid openings, the tighter the spread of light will be. Here's an image taken with the Strobie's grid. Grids are extremely useful as hair lights because they allow you to carefully place the light on the subject's hair without having the light spill into other areas of the frame. The word gobo is short for go-between. It refers to anything that goes between the subject and the light. Gobos are great for casting shadows and creating patterns. Flags are used to control the spread of light. For example, you might want to block the flash from falling on your background. The flag shown here is made by Handheld. This image shows the effect of using the Handheld flag to block direct light from falling on the subject while bouncing the flash. Flags are useful when you're working with bounce flash. By flagging your flash, you block frontal lighting on the subject from the flash head. That means you'll have more directional light when you bounce using a flag. The Rogue flash bender shown here is flagging a flash that will bounce off the ceiling. You can see the effect of the Rogue flash bender flag here. It was placed between the upward pointing flash and the model, so only light bounced from the ceiling and walls fell on her. The black foamy thing, or BFT as it was named by wedding and portrait photographer Neil Van Niekerk, is simply a piece of craft foam and a sturdy black rubber band. You attach the BFT to your flash so that it becomes a flag and, at times, a half snoot. This image shows the effect of the black foamy thing. If you want to create short or side lighting on a subject, the BFT works as a flag to prevent light from the flash head from falling on the subject from the camera's perspective. It's also useful when you're trying to bounce light from behind you. We've discussed the role the direction of light plays in defining the shape, dimension, texture, and color of your subject. The direction your light comes from can also dramatically change the mood of your photograph. Here, the light is positioned at 0 degrees horizontally. In other words, it's aligned with the lens and subject, like on-camera flash. In this image, the light is at 45 degrees, which creates shadows that define the shape and dimension of the subject. While there are no rules about where you have to place your flash, it's generally agreed that direct on-camera flash is the least appealing angle, since it makes the subject appear flat and dimensionless. Here the light is at 90 degrees. The interplay of light and shadow is what helps make photographs interesting and visually appealing. In this image, the light is at 135 degrees. One of the great features of the Nikon Creative Lighting System is the ability to take the flash off the camera and place it at any point in a 360-degree circle around your subject. Here, the light is at 180 degrees, behind the subject. We shouldn't limit ourselves by just moving the flash horizontally around the subject. We can also move the flash vertically. This image was taken at 0 degrees vertically, in other words, dead on. Notice how the light and shadow change when you move the flash to 45 degrees above the subject. Here, the flash is 45 degrees below the subject. Remember that the sun is our main source of light, so we're conditioned to thinking of light as coming from a single source above, with shadows falling below. Be aware of where your shadows fall. 2 sets of shadows or shadows cast from below will appear unnatural. That doesn't mean they can't work, but they'll create a specific mood used for a purpose. Let's take a look at the most common portrait lighting patterns. They're based on the shadows the main light casts on the portrait subject. This image shows butterfly lighting, which is also called paramount lighting because of its popularity among Hollywood photographers in the 1930s. The main light is on axis with the subject and placed 20 to 70 degrees above her. It creates a butterfly-shaped shadow below the subject's nose. The light shouldn't be so high that it causes the nose shadow to touch the lip or the eye sockets to be excessively shadowed. Loop lighting is probably the most popular portrait lighting pattern. It's named after the loop-like shadow it creates below the nose. To create it, place the main light about 30 to 50 degrees above the subject's face and 30 to 50 degrees to the right or left. Named after the Dutch painter, Rembrandt lighting has a very distinctive look. It's similar to loop lighting, but the main light is 50 to 70 degrees above the subject and 50 to 70 degrees to the left or right. The nose shadow extends to the edge of the mouth, and there's a small triangle of light on the cheek on the shadow side of the face. Split lighting is achieved by positioning the light at 90 degrees to the right or left of the subject and 20 to 30 degrees above. It can slim a face and hide imperfections on the shadow side, but it also accentuates texture and imperfections in the skin. It's most often used on men. Ghoul, or horror lighting, is achieved by placing the light in front of and below the subject's face. Because the light casts shadows in a direction we're not used to, it gives a very eerie feel to photographs. It's not considered flattering, but it can be used to make dramatic photographs. Lighting positions have to do with the light and subject positions in relation to the camera. A lighting position can be broad, short, or frontal. Some lighting patterns can be set up from either a short or a broad position. Broad lighting is created by placing the light on the side of the face that's most visible to the camera, or turned toward it. This tends to broaden facial features, so it's good for narrow or angular faces. It's also useful for eliminating eyeglass glare. Short lighting places the light on the side of the face that's least visible to the camera or turned away from it. It works with a variety of facial shapes and is useful for making faces appear slimmer. Frontal lighting occurs when the light, camera, and subject are lined up on the same lateral axis. It's not very good for showing depth or contouring in the face, but it can hide wrinkles, blemishes, and skin imperfections. A lot of beauty and glamour lighting is frontal lighting. To take a great photograph, you need to consider the proper technique for getting the result you want. Direct flash produces harsh, well-defined shadows and flat light when it's on camera. Moving it off camera lets you create dramatic photographs by determining where shadows fall. Here, I use direct off-camera flash to emphasize the bodybuilder's muscle definition. In this image, there are two direct off-camera speedlights, one to camera right and one pointing toward the model's back. The well-defined shadows created by the direct off-camera flash give a rock and roll feel to the shot. You can see the strong shadow created by a direct off-camera flash here. I decided it was too harsh, so I put the flash back on my camera and adjusted the position of the flash head to bounce the light instead. Knowing how to properly bounce your flash is an important skill. Here you can see the softer light produced by bouncing the flash. One of the most valuable features of the advanced speedlights is their adjustable flash head. It lets you bounce your on-camera flash off walls, ceilings, or practically any surface that isn't too far away. To get a good exposure with bounced flash, you need to evaluate the distance between the bounced surface and your subject. Remember the inverse square law, which tells us that the angle of incidence equals the angle of reflectance. In this image, I used a direct on-camera flash. When I bounced the flash off a wall that was the same distance from each person in the scene, it illuminated both of them. In the first shot, the person in the background was too far away from the on-camera flash for it to reach him. I used a similar technique here, bouncing my flash off of a wall behind me and a bit to camera right. That turned the wall into a light source that was equidistant to everyone in the photo, lighting the whole group evenly. You'll generally lose a couple of stops of light when you bounce a flash, so you'll need to adjust your exposure accordingly. Choosing the direction of your bounce flash also makes a huge difference. When you're choosing a surface to bounce off of, consider the portrait lighting pattern and position that would be best for your subject, and think of the surface as a large softbox. Here I bounce my flash to the right to create broad lighting. Here I created frontal lighting and exposed more of the background by bouncing the flash off of a wall behind me. In this image, I bounce my flash to the left for short lighting. Remember that you can further control your bounced flash by putting a modifier on your speedlight to prevent direct light from falling on your subject. For this shot, I flagged my flash with a black foamy thing and bounced it to camera left. This is another image I took with a flash bounced off a white surface to the left. Pay attention to the color of the surface you're using to bounce your flash. It's generally best to use a white or neutral surface, since any color in the surface will be transmitted back to the subject. High-speed sync is particularly useful when you want to use a wide aperture without overexposing your background, or when you want to use movement-stopping shutter speeds above the maximum flash sync speed. This image shows a scene without flash, with the exposure set for the background. Here I added a flash to light the couple in the foreground. My shutter speed was set at 1/1600th of a second so that I could use a wide f4 aperture to achieve a shallow depth of field. A shutter speed that high can only be used with a flash that offers high-speed sync. This image was taken without any flash. When you're photographing a portrait outdoors in deep shade, you'll probably want to add a little fill flash to open up deep shadows and create catch lights in the eyes. If you're in automatic white balance mode, fill flash can also warm up the scene. By adding just a bit of fill flash here, I was able to create more attractive light on Lindsay and warm up the photograph's color balance. I adjusted her pose to make the best use of the available light with a little fill in the final shot. The goal is to get just a kiss of light, not to make it look like a flash was used. If your fill is too bright, adjust your flash exposure compensation. The best flash photographs usually don't make it apparent that flash was used. To achieve that, it's important that your flash have the same characteristics as the ambient light. Their direction should be the same, and the flash intensity shouldn't be dramatically different. Here's a scene with only ambient light. For this shot, I reduced the exposure to capture the way the sun was reflecting off the buildings in the background and added a bit of flash in a softbox for the couple. Here's an indoor image with ambient light only. Adding a bit of bounce flash to camera left provided clean, natural-looking lighting on the bride. Another thing that can draw attention to the fact that you use flash in an image is a difference in color between the ambient light and the flash. To make them match, you can put a colored gel over your flash. Here, I gelled my Speedlight with a half CTO gel to match the sunlight. Gels are thin sheets of colored acetate that are placed over the flash head to change the color of the light coming from it. CTO in the name of the gel used for the last shot stands for Colored Temperature Orange. The half designation indicates the intensity of the color. Speedlights naturally have a color temperature of about 5500 K, which is about the same as midday sun. When you're shooting closer to sunset or indoors in tungsten lighting, the ambient lighting will be much warmer at 2500 to 3800 K. The light from the Speedlight will appear blue in comparison. Notice how cool the bare flash is in this photo. For this image, I added a half CTO gel to warm up the light of the flash and match it with the ambient light. You can also use gels creatively. There are 3 things to consider when doing this: the gelled Speedlight's color temperature, the existing light's color temperature, and your camera's white balance. By changing any one of these, you can create photographs that have a very different feel to them. Here, for example, I made an image pop simply by gelling my background light with a red gel. You can use the same approach outside of the studio to change any drab, neutral-colored setting into something extraordinary. Here I had a Speedlight in a softbox illuminating the model and a second flash with a purple gel pointed at the wall behind her. For this image, I simply left the background flash ungelled. Notice how blue the light on the elevator door looks. That's because the ambient tungsten light and the light on the model are much warmer. To match the main light to the ambient light, I fitted it with a full CTO gel and set the camera's white balance to tungsten. As we've shown, one way to create beautiful directional light is by bouncing your on-camera flash. That's what I did in this photo, but I felt that the bounce flash illuminated too much of the room and took away from the couple and the sunset behind them. To improve the image, I used another way of creating beautiful directional light with a flash, taking it off the camera. For this photo, my assistant pointed the flash directly at the couple and snooted it slightly with his hands while I controlled it from my camera. When your Speedlight is off camera, there are 3 ways you can maintain ITTL communication between the flash and the camera. Connect them with a flash cord, use Nikon's built-in advanced wireless system, or use separate TTL radio triggers. Nikon produces 2 TTL remote cords, the SC28 and the SC29 shown here. One end of the cord attaches to the camera's hot shoe, and the other attaches to the flash. Holding my Speedlight in one hand and having it connected to the camera in my other hand with the SC29 cord, lets me quickly move my flash to any position. I love how moving the flash below camera level casts large shadows of the dancing guest in this shot. Nikon's Advanced Wireless Lighting, or AWL system, lets you use up to 3 groups of off-camera flashes in TTL mode without cords. Each group can have multiple flash units in it, and its power level can be controlled independently by the commander that's built into a master flash, a Nikon camera, or a commander unit like the SU800 shown here. Because Nikon's Advanced Wireless Lighting System uses visible or infrared pre-flashes for communication between the commander and the remote speedlights, you have to make sure there's a line of sight between them. You can set your flashes and commander to communicate over one of 4 available channels, which means that up to 4 photographers can work in close proximity without triggering each other's speedlights. To set up an SB900 flash to work as a master flash, first turn the power switch while holding down the button in the center to master. Then press function button 1 to highlight the M on the LCD. On the SB910, press function button 2. Now press the mode button, then turn the selector dial to choose the desired mode. Press the OK button to confirm the setting. You can adjust the flash output level by pressing function button 2, turning the selector dial, and confirming with the OK button. On the SB910, use function button 3. If you have another group of remote speedlights, press function button 1 again and turn the selector dial to go to the next group. Use function button 2 on the SB910. When you're finished setting the mode and power output for every group, press the OK button twice to make CH appear. Now you can select the channel your system will use to communicate by pressing function button 2 and turning the selector dial to choose a channel number. Use function button 3 on the SB910. Press the OK button to confirm the setting. To set an SB900 up as a wireless remote unit, turn the power switch while holding down the button in the center to remote. To set the group, press function button 1 and turn the selector dial to choose the desired group. On the SB910, press function button 2. Press the OK button to confirm the setting. To set the channel, press function button 1 and turn the selector dial to choose the desired channel. Press the OK button to confirm the setting. All flash modes and flash output levels are controlled from the master flash. As a master, the SB700 lets you control 2 groups of flashes. But unlike the SB900 and SB910, it doesn't let you use a different mode in each group. Both groups have to be in either TTL or manual mode. To set the SB700 up as a master flash, turn the power switch while holding down the button in the center to master. Then set the mode selector to TTL or manual. To adjust the flash output level, press the SEL button and turn the selector dial. Press the OK button to confirm the setting. Press the SEL button again to go to another group and adjust the flash output. Press the OK button to confirm the setting. To select the channel, press the SEL one more time. Choose the channel with the selector dial and then choose OK to confirm the setting. To set the SB700 up as a wireless remote unit, turn the power switch while holding down the button in the center to remote. To set the group, press the SEL button to highlight the group and turn the selector dial to choose the desired group. Press the OK button to confirm the setting. To set the channel, press the SEL button again to highlight the channel. Turn the selector dial to choose the desired channel. Press the OK button to confirm the setting. The SB700 also offers a quick wireless control mode that lets you balance the output level ratio of 2 remote flash unit groups. To set it up, turn the power switch to master and move the mode selector to AB. Press the SEL button to select the flash output level ratio of groups A and B. Rotate the selector dial to select the correct ratio. Press OK to confirm the setting. Nikon's wireless system is powerful, but it does have a 30-foot limit and require a line of sight between commander and flash. Bright sunlight can also interfere with it. When those limitations are a problem, using radio triggers works better. For this shot, I used a Pocket Wizard trigger and didn't have to worry about maintaining a line of sight during a fast-moving event. Pocket Wizard's line of ITTL radio components includes several transmitters, receivers, and transceivers designed specifically to function with your Nikon gear. They let you control your speedlights wirelessly like Nikon's own system, but they don't require a line of sight and have ranges up to 800 feet. One of the things I love about ITTL radio transmitters is the ability to control my flash output from a master speedlight on the camera. Here's the lighting setup I used for the image on the left. I had a Pocket Wizard Mini TT1 transmitter and AC3 zone controller on camera, one SB900 flash in a softbox with a Pocket Wizard Flex TT5 transceiver, and another SB900 as a rim light with a Flex TT5. The radio popper system is another wireless trigger option. It's composed of a transmitter that sits on top of the master flash head and a receiver that mounts in front of the remote speedlight's light sensor. The nice thing about radio poppers is that you can use them in combination with Nikon's own wireless system. Being able to move around my subject to get different angles without worrying about a line of sight connection allows me to work more quickly and focus more on my subject. Radio poppers have a 1,500-foot range. This is the lighting setup I used for the image on the left. One on-camera speedlight was set to commander mode with a radio popper transmitter. I added an SB900 flash with a radio popper receiver to camera left as the main light, and I put another behind the subject as a rim light. When you take your speedlight off the camera, you'll probably attach it to a cold shoe mount on a light stand or a monopod. The problem with cold shoes is that they don't tend to be terribly secure. To solve that problem, you can use the Frio mount adapter, which is shown here. The Frio has a dual locking system and it's easier to use than a regular cold shoe. It doesn't require you to tighten any knobs. You just push the flash into the Frio and it's securely locked into place. I've replaced all the cold shoe connectors on my Interfit and Lastolite softboxes with Frios. Using multiple flashes in as many as 3 groups lets you fine-tune your lighting, expose different parts of a scene differently, provide visual interest, show your subject's shape and dimension, or even completely change the mood of an image. I love the juxtaposition of the top hat and goggles in this image of Dr. Pierce, and I knew I wanted to add to the mood with some dramatic lighting. This first capture was a bit overexposed. Working in ITTL, I dialed my exposure down -1.3 EV for the second frame, but I didn't like how there was no separation between the coat and the background. By adding a second light, I was able to provide separation to create a very distinct mood in the photograph. Here's the final image, shot at ISO 400 in 1/200th of a second, with a relatively shallow depth of field provided by an f4 aperture. These photos were taken on a set of stairs in complete shade. The first photo was lit by an SB900 in a softbox. While it's a nice photo, the real magic came when I added a second light at the top of the stairs behind my subject. It makes it look like she's sitting on a flight of sun-drenched steps. At a wedding reception, there's usually a lot of action. I always try to focus on the bride and groom while still making sure to feature the guest. I bounce my on-camera flash for soft lighting on the couple and add a second speed light on a stand for people in the background. For this outdoor reception at night, there was no place to bounce my flash. To give the photo depth and definition, I placed an unmodified speedlight to camera left at the back of the seating area. Here I used a second speedlight on a stand pointed at the back of the couple to throw their shadow onto the wall. I feel that the shadows created by using a second flash add to the visual interest of the photograph. At a wedding reception, things are constantly moving. If your flash is pointed into the room, it's easy to accidentally get the flash itself in the frame. Some people find that acceptable. I use ITTL radio triggers when working with remotes as room lights. Otherwise, it's too easy to lose line of sight. Now that we've discussed all the equipment and techniques available as part of the Nikon Creative Lighting System, let's take a look at how we can apply them to several different photo shoots. I shot all of the following series with a Nikon D700. In this one, we were going for a Black Widow look, so I wanted the scene to have a mysterious feeling. One SB900 Speedlight with a Pocket Wizard Flex TT5 was attached to a monopod to be the main light. I adjusted the zoom to 135mm on the head to create a spotlight effect. A second SB900 and Flex TT5 were placed on a windowsill in the background to provide rim light. The setting for this shoot was a colonnade outside an abandoned church, and we were working in almost complete darkness. Here, I adjusted the second Speedlight to function as a background light. You can see how it completely changes the feel of the photograph. In all of these photographs, I used the Pocket Wizard Flex TT5 to trigger my flashes. It was necessary because the flash on the windowsill wasn't in the line of sight of my master flash. I used a master flash on top of the Pocket Wizard Flex TT5 to control the remote flashes, setting the background flash exposure compensation at -1 EV. For the final image, I moved Diana over to the columns. The main light was still an unmodified speedlight on a monopod, and the second speedlight was used as a rim light. Ray had recently gotten back into biking when I took this next series of photos. He wanted a dramatic photo in a picturesque landscape, so Red Rocks, Nevada seemed like the perfect location. We set up 3 SB900 speedlights on light stands. One is the main light and 2 as kickers to provide added dimension to his body. They were controlled by a 4th master speedlight on the camera, which was set to commander mode so that it didn't add any light to the exposure. To conserve battery power and get the most power output for my flashes, I worked at the maximum flash sync speed of 1/250th of a second. To get the last photo of Ray riding through the desert, I increased my shutter speed to 1/500th of a second to make sure I stopped the motion. Even in the confines of a messy kitchen, it's still possible to take a dramatic portrait. By using your camera settings to kill the ambient light and positioning speedlights as the main source of light, you can get great portraits anywhere. I set up SB900 speedlights as main and background lights controlled by an on-camera master flash set to commander mode. At f2.2 and 1/80th of a second, there was still enough ambient light to show we were sitting in a kitchen. By changing my settings to f16 and 1/250th of a second, I ensured that the ambient light wouldn't register. I also zoomed my flash head in and used a piece of paper to smooth the speedlight just a little bit more. My camera's white balance was still set to tungsten from a previous shoot when I took the first photograph from this session in an Art Deco hotel lounge, but I found the unnatural color palette appealing and decided to continue using it. I set up SB900 speedlights equipped with radio poppers as the main and accent lights, controlled by an on-camera master flash set to commander mode. Shooting in TTL mode, I had flash exposure compensation set to -1 EV for the main light and -1.3 EV for the accent light. I liked the spotlight effect of the direct flash on Mallory, but I didn't like how there was no definition on her legs. To address this, I placed a second accent speedlight on the floor to camera right and aimed it toward her legs. While it properly illuminated her legs, it also caused a distracting cross shadow on the couch. By using a piece of black foam to flag my flash, I was able to control the light falling on her legs better. All of the images were shot at f2.8 and 1/100th of a second at ISO 1000. For comparison, I also photographed our beautiful model in the same setup with a softbox and a more accurate color balance. You can see how these changes created a totally different mood in the images. In this session, you'll see the value of moving around your subjects and always being willing to change up your lighting to get several different looks from one setting. In this shot, I had just a speedlight and a softbox on a monopod. The setting for the shoot was a cool old building in St. Louis, Missouri. To show the building's ornate door, I put a speedlight on the ground and aimed it up toward the door. You can see the effect of just the background light here. With both the main light and the background light, the photograph is more interesting. For this shoot, all the speedlights were equipped with Pocket Wizard Flex TT5 units. The main light and background light were controlled by a master flash on camera, which was set to commander mode. In the second set of photographs, I placed the second speedlight on the ground behind them. In this shot, the flash is off. Here the background flash is at 1/4 power. In this image, I set the flash on full power. I like the way it blows out the background. In the final set of photographs, you can see how changing your camera position can change the look of your photographs. The lights are in the same position as in the previous set. Here, the second speedlight acts as a kicker to help separate the couple from the background. From this camera position, the second speedlight becomes a background light. Moving to another angle changed the effect of the lighting setup again. When I first saw this hollow sculpture in St. Louis City Garden, I thought about how cool it would be to make the eyes glow red. I ended up placing 2 red gelled speedlights at full power in the sculpture, each fitted with a Pocket Wizard Flex TT5. The main light was a speedlight in a softbox. Here we move my subject to the opening of the sculpture. You can see the red gelled speedlights going off in the sculpture. Here's the scene without any additional lighting. I wanted to create a photograph where the light in the scene came from inside an umbrella. With the help of gaffer's tape and a Pocket Wizard Flex TT5, I was able to place the speedlight in the umbrella and trigger it. I set my flash exposure compensation at -1.7 EV because the flash was so close to the subject. You can paint with light by firing a flash multiple times while leaving your shutter open. Place your camera on a tripod, then press the speedlight's test button to fire it as you move around the scene. Don't get caught in between the light and the camera unless you want to be exposed in the frame. For this photograph, I fired my flash 8 times, 6 on the background and 2 on myself. If I've learned nothing else from my journey through flash photography, it's that you just need to try things out. Get out there and practice. Learn how to do everything, use your speedlights, and play with all the different modifiers. When you master what Nikon's creative lighting system has to offer, the only limit will be your imagination. For more information on the tools and techniques presented here, look for the book Nikon Speedlight Handbook, Flash Techniques for Digital Photographers by Stephanie Zettl. It's available at www.AmherstMedia.com and wherever photography books are sold. Stephanie Zettl is a photographer from St. Louis, Missouri, who specializes in photographing people. She got her start as a newspaper photographer and enjoyed photographing people and their relationship to the events around them. In 2003, she started her own business specializing in documentary-style wedding and portrait photography. Her husband, Peter, later joined her in the business as a photographer and business partner. Together, they have developed into one of the top wedding studios in St. Louis, winning many awards both locally and internationally. Stephanie is a respected lecturer and mentor who enjoys watching new photographers improve their skills. Education is important to Stephanie, and she believes that photographers should invest in themselves by studying both the technical and creative sides of photography. My passion lies not in the act of pressing a shutter, but in telling the story of the person in front of my lens, she says. Knowing my technical skills so that they become second nature to me allows me to better connect with my subject and share their story with much more clarity and strength. More of Stephanie's work can be found on our website at www.zettlphoto.com.